picture this, like a giant just waking up. It's hungry for growth, right? It needs to keep growing and growing, but at the same time, it's got this awareness of how precious all the stuff it's using up actually is.
Yeah, I get that.
That's kind of India right now.
Yeah.
It's on track to become the fastest growing big economy out there. All those projections, IMF, World Bank, you name it, they're all pointing to GDP growth around 6.5 to 6.7% consistently in the mid-2020s.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
But here's the big question, the one we're going to unpack in this deep dive. Can India pull off this incredible growth and be responsible towards the environment at the same time? We're going to dig into a bunch of recent research to see how India is planning to become what some are calling a sustainable powerhouse. We'll cover everything from their economic trajectory to the environmental challenges to their sustainability goals.
Yeah.
Big ones like the NAPCC and reaching net zero emissions by 2070. Plus, we'll look at the explosion in renewable energy, new green technologies, building sustainable infrastructure, and what role India is playing on the global stage. The key question we're trying to answer is, how can India find that balance between its development needs and taking care of the environment? And where are we seeing the most promising signs that it's actually working?
It's a really delicate balancing act. You've got this incredible economic expansion happening alongside some pretty stark environmental realities. Like, think about the air quality in some Indian cities. It's among the worst in the world.
Yeah, I've seen the reports.
All that fine particulate matter, PM 2.5, from industry and tons of vehicles, it's a major issue. We're talking about a shocking 1.5 million deaths every year linked to this, and the economic losses are huge. And then there's the water. Most of the surface water is not safe to drink because of untreated sewage, industrial waste, and all the runoff from agriculture.
A whole bunch of knock-on effects for people's health and the economy.
Exactly. Plus, you can't forget about deforestation and the fact that a huge amount of land is either degraded or turning into desert. It's a pretty worrying picture.
So given these serious challenges, what's the overall game plan? What big picture goals has India set to tackle this?
Well, India's put in place some really comprehensive policy frameworks. One of the main ones is the National Action Plan on Climate Change, or NAPCC. It's this broad strategy for both adapting to climate change and making sure development is ecologically sustainable. There are a bunch of key missions within that, like the National Solar Mission, which initially aimed for 100 gigawatts, that's a GW, a massive amount of solar power by 2022. Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And these missions involve mandates for industries, public-private partnerships, and various forms of financial support. Then, on top of the national plan, each state has its own action plan tailored to their specific situation.
And the goal of hitting net zero emissions by 2070, that just seems incredibly ambitious for a country growing as fast as India. How on earth are they planning to make that happen?
It is ambitious, no doubt. But it's backed up by some pretty significant interim targets. For example, by 2030, they want to have 500 gigaW of power capacity coming from sources other than fossil fuels, and for 50% of their energy to be renewable. There are a bunch of key strategies they're working on to achieve these targets. Like, they're ramping up domestic production of solar panels and other components. They're building this massive green energy corridor to transmit all that clean power across the country. And they're even subsidizing things like solar-powered irrigation pumps for farmers. They laid out a lot of this in a long-term low-carbon development strategy they submitted to the UN.
So it sounds like a pretty well-thought-out plan, but there's some big potential roadblocks in there, right?
Oh, absolutely. A major challenge is India's reliance on coal. They're still very dependent on it for energy. Plus, the sheer amount of investment needed to make this transition is enormous, something like $10.1 trillion.
$10.1 trillion.
$10.1 trillion. It's not going to be easy to pull off.
Okay, so let's talk about one of the most exciting parts of this whole story. The incredible boom in renewable energy in India. One thing that really stood out in our research is how India blew past the 100 GWW milestone for installed solar capacity in early 2025. That's an almost vertical climb.
It really is. Solar power has seen absolutely incredible growth in India. Since 2014, it's increased by an astounding 300 and 450%.
3,450.
Yep. And now solar energy provides almost half of India's total renewable power. Just in 2024 alone, they added a record amount of new capacity, both through those huge solar farms and rooftop installations. Programs like the PM Surya Ghar Yojana are really helping to drive that growth. And on top of all that, India's capacity to manufacture solar modules has just exploded. They're aiming to be able to produce a whopping 100 gigawatt worth of modules every year by 2030. The future for solar in India looks very, very bright.
So solar is doing phenomenally well, but what about wind power? How big of a player is that in India?
Wind's a major force, too. India already has the fourth largest installed wind power capacity in the world. Right now, it's providing about 10% of the country's electricity, and it's only going to increase. Projections show the rate at which they add new wind capacity each year is going to double, with a target of reaching 140 gigawatt by 2030. Some states are really charging ahead on this front. Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, they're all seeing massive wind farms popping up. There's also a big push for projects that combine wind and solar power, which is really interesting.
Really smart, right?
Yeah.
They take advantage of both.
Exactly.
So we've talked about solar and wind, but what about hydropower? It seems like that's a much more established renewable source. Is it still a big part of the picture in India?
Oh, absolutely. Hydropower is still critical for India. They've got tons of potential there. Right now, they have about 47 gigawatt of large hydro capacity, but that's going to increase significantly. They've got 15 gigawatt more under construction right now, and the aim is to hit 67 gigawatt by the early 2030s. That's over a 50% increase.
Huge.
Yeah. They're also putting a lot of focus on what are called pumped storage projects. These basically act like giant batteries for the power grid, storing energy when there's a surplus and releasing it when demand is high. The goal is to have about 55 gigawatt of pumped storage capacity by 2031-32. The government's doing a lot to encourage these projects. They've officially categorized large hydro as renewable energy, and they're setting targets for how much hydropower companies have to purchase. But you know what's crazy is India has this massive amount of untapped hydropower potential. Out of a possible 145,000 milliW, they've only harnessed about 32%.
Wow, so there's still so much room to grow.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like India is putting its money where its mouth is, with a lot of investment flowing into this clean energy transition.
Yeah, absolutely. Over the last few years, we've seen close to $20 billion in foreign direct investment, FDI, pouring into the renewable energy sector. And projections show that this year alone, investment could jump by a massive 83%, reaching $16.5 billion. Even those big traditional fossil fuel companies are starting to diversify their portfolios and get involved in renewables.
You see where the wind is blowing, I guess.
Yeah, for some serious hurdles they need to overcome.
Such as?
Well, the financial health of those power distribution companies, the discoms, is a big concern. A lot of them are struggling financially. Also, India still relies heavily on imports for those critical minerals needed to manufacture solar panels and wind turbines. It's a big vulnerability. And then there are the challenges of integrating all this new renewable energy into the grid and making sure it's stable and reliable.
So it's not just about generating clean energy, right? It's about the whole ecosystem.
Exactly.
Speaking of the ecosystem, beyond all this energy stuff, are we seeing innovation in other areas and a genuine rise in sustainable businesses?
Oh, definitely. What's really impressive is the sheer variety of green technology innovations happening in India. We're seeing cool new stuff in all sorts of sectors.
Well, I'm all ears.
Okay, so there are those super efficient bifacial solar panels, which can capture sunlight from both sides. Then you've got AI being used to forecast solar power generation and to manage smart microgrids, making the whole system more efficient. In cities, there are smart traffic management systems to reduce congestion and pollution and new technologies for managing waste sustainably. And in buildings, there are all sorts of innovations to make them more energy efficient. Even in agriculture, they're using drones for precision farming and monitoring crops, which can really minimize water and pesticide use.
So green tech is really taking off. What about sustainable businesses, though? Are they actually walking the talk?
Well, our research shows that a large majority of Indian businesses, something like 91%, are increasing their investments in sustainability. That's huge. All integrating sustainability into their core business strategies. Plus, we're seeing whole new sustainable industries popping up, like in semiconductor packaging, which is becoming really important, and of course in sustainable agriculture. It's a really exciting time for this space.
Very cool. So you've got all these new technologies and businesses popping up, but what about the actual physical infrastructure to support a sustainable future? Stuff like smart cities and cleaner transportation. How's India doing on that front?
Well, for starters, India's got this smart cities mission. It's a really ambitious program aiming to transform 100 cities across the country. Their focus is on making these cities much more energy efficient. That means using things like smart grids to manage electricity better and constructing energy efficient buildings. They're also focusing on improving waste and water management in a sustainable way and incorporating more green spaces within these cities.
Breathing room.
Exactly. We're already seeing some great examples of cities making progress. Like Mysore has managed to significantly reduce transport emissions, and Diu is now powered by 100% renewable energy during the day. Surat has developed amazing biodiversity parks, and there's Gift City, which is being built as a greenfield smart city from the ground up.
It's one thing to plan these things, though. Actually implementing them is a whole other story.
For sure, there are definitely challenges. Issues like ensuring inclusivity, finding the money to make it all happen, and even dealing with cybersecurity threats. These are all things they have to grapple with. But the direction is clear, and the commitment is there.
Okay, so how about sustainable transportation? What's happening on that front?
The government's really pushing to get more electric vehicles, or EVs, on the roads, particularly in public transport. They've got a scheme called FAME, too, that stands for Faster Adoption and Manufacturing of Electric Vehicles, and the National Electric Bus Program, or NEBP, which aims to have a whopping 50,000 electric buses on the roads by 2030. They've even lowered the tax on EVs to make them more affordable.
Wow, 50,000 electric buses.
Yeah, it's a big goal. But there are definitely challenges here, too. The number of electric buses actually operating is still quite low, and a lot of the state transport companies are struggling financially, which makes it hard for them to invest in new buses. Plus, the charging infrastructure needs to be scaled up massively to support all these EVs.
I guess those are pretty universal problems for EVs right now.
Definitely.
But is there a clear roadmap for how they see EV adoption playing out?
Oh, yeah. NT Aayog, which is like a think tank for the government, has set some pretty aggressive targets for EV sales penetration by 2030. And Indian Railways, which is massive, has this huge mission 100% electrification program underway, which is really exciting. So there's a lot happening on the sustainable transportation front.
So zooming out a bit, it seems like India's efforts aren't just focused domestically, right? They're playing a bigger role on the global stage, too.
Right. India's efforts are definitely not just limited to what's happening within its own borders. They're engaging on the global stage in a big way. What makes it interesting is that India's in this sort of dual position when it comes to climate change.
How so?
Well, on the one hand, they're a developing country that's particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases globally.
Tricky position to be in.
Yeah, definitely complex. But despite this, India's really stepped up with some ambitious climate goals for 2030.
Like what?
They're aiming to significantly reduce their emissions intensity. That means emitting less carbon per unit of economic output, and to get a large chunk of their energy from non-fossil fuel sources. Plus, they've pledged to create huge carbon sinks, like forests, to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And then there's that big net zero target for 2070. What's encouraging is that they're already showing signs of decoupling economic growth from emissions growth, which is key.
So they're saying we can have our cake and eat it too.
Well, something like that. But they're also very vocal in international negotiations about the need for climate justice, for richer countries to provide financial and technological support to developing countries to help them transition to a low-carbon future. They emphasize the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, meaning everyone needs to act, but richer countries need to take on a bigger share of the burden.
Makes sense.
India's also been proactive in setting up global initiatives to address climate change. They were one of the co-founders of the International Solar Alliance, or ISA, which is this big partnership of countries aiming to promote solar energy. And then there's the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative, OSAWAG, which aims to create this interconnected global grid for renewable energy, which is really ambitious. The point is, India's not just talking the talk, they're actually making tangible progress in reducing their emissions.
I'm getting the sense that they really want to be seen as a leader in this whole green economy transition.
Absolutely. With all the investments they're making in renewable energy and the ambitious targets they've set, they have the potential to become a real leader in the global green energy market. They're also putting a lot of focus on green hydrogen, which is seen as a key fuel for the future. And with all these sustainable businesses and green technologies emerging, plus the growth of ESG investing, India is definitely positioning itself as a major player in the global sustainability movement. It's really encouraging to see.
So it sounds like they're really pushing for sustainability on all fronts, domestically and globally.
Yes, and they're even actively sharing their expertise and lessons learned with other developing countries. There's the India-UN Development Partnership Fund, which supports sustainable development projects in other countries. They're also involved in things like the Partnership for Action on Green Economy, PAYG, helping countries implement eco-labeling programs. And they're sharing their knowledge about renewable energy and critical minerals with African countries, even helping them scale up renewable energy projects through public-private partnerships. They're really trying to lead by example and help others follow a similar path.
So to pull it all together, it seems like India's in this incredible moment. They're going through this period of impressive economic growth, but they're facing some significant environmental challenges at the same time. But what's really inspiring is their commitment to ambitious sustainability goals, the fact that their renewable energy sector is absolutely booming, and all the incredible innovation we're seeing across the board. They're really trying to walk this tightrope between development and environmental stewardship.
Exactly. This whole deep dive, all the research we've looked at, it's really about understanding that balancing act. And what's clear is that they've made some really impressive progress, but there are still some pretty significant hurdles that they need to overcome. It's a fascinating story to follow.
And it leaves us with a big question for all of you listening. Given India's size, its population, and how rapidly it's growing, what are the ripple effects of its journey towards sustainability going to be for the rest of the world? What can we learn from both their successes and the challenges they're still facing as we collectively try to build a more sustainable future? There's a lot to think about there, and we hope this deep dive has given you some new insights to ponder.